What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. So we are on day 14 of my Dead Palettes Walking. It's a 25-day long palette resurrection where I work my way through my entire palette collection and use a different palette every day and do a tutorial with it. So thank you for hanging around this long. For those of you who have been keeping up with the series and commenting and everything, that's just amazing. You're freaking awesome. I'm trying to make some of these videos shorter and less exasperating, just to kind of break up the monotony. I know some of you like voiceovers, some of you don't. You just like the music to play, so I've been kind of doing a little bit of both. Anyway, thank you all for sticking with it. Today I am reviving a palette from my collection that admittedly I freaking hardly ever use because I have the original palette. Now this is the one that's like a blatant, this is the dupe, i.e. blatant ripoff of the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. Like, I mean, it's literally a dupe, as in it's a duplicate. Like, it's not even a dupe in the sense that they just tried to give the same feel of Modern Renaissance. No, it is like an exact replica, save a couple of shades, one of them being my favorite, which is why I never reached for this, because there's no dupe for Venetian Red, and that is my favorite shade in the Modern Renaissance palette. But this is a good freaking palette, and like I used it today and it just made me realize, like, I haven't used this in forever. Like I said, I use the Modern Renaissance palette because it has Venetian Red in it and because the shimmers are better in Modern Renaissance. But it just made me realize using this palette that just how much more I love the mattes in here than I do the Anastasia Modern Renaissance. The way that you can blend the magenta shade in this palette compared to how you can not blend Love Letter, because it's just wholly unblendable and annoying to work with. It just makes me wish that I used this more. I feel like I should use it in tandem with Modern Renaissance, or I should depot both of them into its own palette to make the best of both worlds. But anyway, I do really love this palette, and I wanted to dig it out today because I feel like, again, these palettes that Wet n Wild is making have become a little more relevant lately because they launched a few more. This came out last holiday season, and now they've got the others that are coming out for this holiday season. They've launched a whole bunch. Some of them are dupes of the Anastasia Beverly Hills, but we're not going to talk about that. As you all may know, with a lot of these videos, I learned something new about being more aware of what I'm buying, whether that be because an eyeshadow palette has expired, like my Sugar Pill. And when I say expired, I don't mean it's like growing bacteria. I mean the shadows have just dried out. I know people are like, I hope you're okay, you haven't had a reaction to it. No, I mean, chances are I'm not going to. But yeah, I'm just saying they dried out. I've also talked about like the hype around certain products like the Morphe 350 palettes, and it's, you know, and stuff like that, especially around the warm toned orangey red palette, which brings me to the lesson I learned with this. And you might see this look and be like, that looks very similar to some of the looks she's done, you know, in the rest of her palette resurrections this month, or just in general on her channel. And there's a good reason for that. It's because if you own one warm orangey red berry tone palette, you pretty much own them all. I'm not saying that there aren't subtle differences between palettes here and there, but to be perfectly honest, like, there's only so many looks you can do with a strictly warm tone palette with oranges and reds that kind of dominate the color scheme. There are only so many freaking looks you can do, and I need to tell myself that. Like, I don't need every single palette that looks like this. I used to think I did when I got the Venus palette, Modern Renaissance, 350, 3502, this one. But I mean, to be perfectly honest, I kind of wanted to get this to compare it to the Anastasia, like, for my channel. So that's the reason I bought this. It's not because I just had to have it, you know. I mean, I did, but for a different reason, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that is what I learned during this tutorial. I was like, well, I'll be fucking damned if this doesn't look like every other freaking look that I've done using warm red, orangey, berry tone palettes. Now, I'm not saying that you are going to have the same issue. I think a lot of people, I mean, everybody has their own style. Everybody has their own shapes that they like to create on their eye. I like to do kind of a rounded, right in my eye socket kind of shape, as you've seen in my past tutorials. I also like to sometimes do like a smoky, winged out, more angular look. But for the most part, there are only so many looks that I personally am going to be able to get out of palettes that look like this. But, you know, when you have palettes that kind of incorporate cool tones in them and just other shades and pops of color, anybody else hate the phrase pop of color? I don't know why I can't stand it. I just can't. That's just what I've noticed. That pretty much tells me that I personally need to refrain from palettes that look like that all look the same. And I'm not saying that's gonna go for everyone, but for me personally, this month has just been one long analysis of my eyeshadow palette collection, just to let me know what I do need and what I don't need, and like what looks I can create and just how much more unique they're gonna be from palette to palette. So yeah, I mean, this series has kind of served its purpose for me personally, and if you all have been doing the same thing, I know a few of you have said that you've been doing the same thing where you're kind of working your way through your palette collection, using a different palette every day, and you've probably learned a lot about what your collection consists of. You know, when you're using one palette for a couple of weeks and then move on to the next palette for a couple of weeks and the next palette for a couple of weeks, you're not really getting a sense of how similar your collection may be, or how similar all of your palettes may be, or how similar the looks are that you tend to gravitate towards. It's another one of those phrases I can't stand. The looks that you tend to do on yourself on a regular basis. Without any more rambling, I will go ahead and get started. So first I'm just gonna set the concealer I prime my eye with. I'm gonna set it with that white shade. Then I'm gonna go into that cool tone transition shade in the palette. And I'm using a fluffy synthetic brush. This is like a generic brush, like Walgreens brand that I got from like a Beauty and the Beast collection a few years ago. I'm not sure if Walgreens still makes this brush as like some generic brush that doesn't have the Beauty and the Beast theme, but yeah, it's really soft synthetic brush essentially. And then I'm gonna go into that magenta shade in the palette, and I'm using a Real Techniques Essential Crease brush, and I'm putting that right in my crease, basically just over top of that cool tone shade. That was basically there just to help blend this one out. I mean, for no other purpose really, because you're not going to be able to see it, and I want this to be more of a transition than anything. I want like the magenta shade to be the one peeking out onto my brow bone. So then I'm going to go into the brown shade in the palette. I'm using a Morphe M506, I believe. It's just a really small blending brush. I'm going to start that on my outer corner, but I am ultimately going to go into my crease and on my inner corner as well. This isn't really going to be a halo eye, but I'm putting this on my inner and outer lid in order to create dimension and depth whenever I put the next shade on. But I don't want to cover up that pink. So here in a minute you'll see me go in and just add a little bit more pink back in, because I want that pink to kind of just fade around the edges. So here I am putting a little bit of pink right on the edge again, just so we don't lose that pink shade, and blending that out. Then I'm going to wet my brush with a fixing spray, and I'm going to go into that shade in the palette that's supposed to be a dupe for Antique Bronze. You really have to use this wet, or honestly, I just don't think this shadow is worth it at all. It seems to me like one of the duds in the palette, but it works when you use it wet, and I'm going to pat that all over my lid, and I am dragging that a little bit into the matte brown shade on either side, not all the way to the edge, but just barely into it to blend it out. Then I'm going to take a pencil brush and I'm going to go back into that magenta shade, and before putting any kind of transition shade down, I'm just putting this on a bare lower lash line. I'm going to put that magenta shade all over my lower lash line, and I'm going to build it up until it looks really pink. I definitely want my lower lid to look more pink than the upper lid. Then I'm going to go into that lilac shade, or that light lavender shade, and I'm going to use that to blend out the pink. I think when I use this shade to blend out the pink, it just looks a little more pink. You don't lose the pinkness as if I were going to use the taupe shade. And like I said, I want my lower lash line to be more pink and definitely very, very fuzzy or diffused. I'm going to say fuzzy from now on. I like that better. So then I'm going to take a clean pencil brush. I'm going to go into that white matte shade that I used to set my base with, and I'm going to use that as an inner corner highlight of sorts. All it's really going to do is just help blend out the edges of the top lid and bottom lid, but it just looks a little blurry. No, wait, fuzzy. And that's the finished look before I put mascara on. But yeah, I really like the way this look turned out. Alright y'all, I hope you liked this tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. If you give it a thumbs down, it'll hurt my feelings done. If you're not a subscriber and you want to be, please hit the subscribe button on your way out. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I will link my Instagram in the description box, as well as my Patreon if you'd like to become a patron of mine. But aside from that, I'll see y'all tomorrow.